Hello everyone, welcome to Pete CD Vinyl World. Today I wanted to respond to a thread I believe that's been going around where people are making a video talking about the top 10 albums they've listened to the most. And I've seen some changes as people make videos. Some people are putting top 10 albums they're listening to right now. Some are putting their top 10 favorite albums. But I believe the original thread was top 10 albums you've listened to most over your lifetime. So that's what I'm gearing it towards. These are not my top 10 favorite albums of all time, but to the best of my ability, I picked out the top 10 that were, I believe, I listened to the most. And obviously those are going to go back to when I was a lot younger and only had, a limited amount of albums to listen to begin with. So first I want to go over, I don't make whole lot of videos, and lately less. I'm going to try to start making some more, but it's more because channel is more of like a music-based channel rather than just vinyl, because I talk about a lot of CDs. In fact, a lot of the albums I'm showing are going to be on CD anyway. But yeah, I noticed now that people they're ranking the songs on one album now. It's like, it seems like people are just making video after video just to get content out there. I originally was going to do this more as a music news topic channel, but then sort of got into the vinyl thing, and I think I talk about more music than just the latest vinyl reissues, which I really have no interest in for the most part. Although the Sammy Hagar era Van Halen albums are getting reissued soon, so I'm definitely going to get those because it's impossible to find like Balance and For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge on vinyl. But anyway, let me get to my top 10 albums I believe I've listened to the most. But if you like these videos, please subscribe and hit the like button. So number one is the first album I ever had. It's a tape that my cousin had given me back when I was 5, and this is my original CD copy from the 80s. It was one of the first albums I got on CD. It's Kiss Destroyer. I probably listened to this every day for years because it's like the only tape I had, so it has to be up there as far as albums I've listened to the most. And I don't think these are in any order because I don't know if you can calculate that or not, but second one is Alice Cooper, Welcome to My Nightmare. I was aware of him when I was a little kid, but it was more of like he was just sort of a personality. I probably hadn't heard much of his music, maybe besides School's Out, until the 80s. A friend of mine that I was friends with was pretty much the only other Kiss fan that I knew in middle school, and he recommended I check out Alice Cooper. So I got the Alice Cooper Show first, which was a live album. And that was another thing I was going to point out. I didn't include any live albums in this, probably because early on I would get a lot of live albums first from a band. So I plan on doing a top 10 live albums I've listened to the most probably after this too, because this would have a lot of live albums as well. But anyway, this was the second album I got from him, and it's a type of album you sort of have to listen to all the way through to get the story and everything, but I listened to this a lot. And I didn't get many of his other studio albums for a while, but then I started picking them up. But this was the one studio album I had from him for a while, so I listened to that. It's one of my favorites from him. Next up, Cheap Trick, Heaven Tonight. I would probably have put Budokan here, because I listened to that probably more, but for the longest time, this was the only studio album I had, probably along with Dream Police and All Shook Up, but this was the one I would always go back to. And probably had those couple until I got the Greatest Hits in '88, but, this one I listened to all the time. Still, actually, they're my favorite album from them, and one of my favorite albums of all time as well. Got a couple oddball choices in here, which might surprise some people. Next up, we're going with Eric Johnson of Via Musicom. This came out in, I believe, 89 or 90. And at the time, I was, playing guitar a few years, so I was really into like Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, those type of players. But Eric Johnson, I thought was different because he wasn't strictly instrumental. Half the songs he had vocals, which are sort of like, I don't want to say adult contemporary, but almost like Christopher Cross combined with like Hendrixy / Stevie Ray Vaughan. But then he had these blazing solos even on those songs. So this album was a big, I wouldn't say influence on me guitar wise, but I listened to this all the time. And it was just one of those guys that wanted to play like and never was able to. If you never heard Eric Johnson, he's got this sort of like violin tone. He uses a Strat most of the time and a fuzz face, but sort of definitely has a unique tune. But that's one of the albums I listen to a lot. Next up is the first Iron Maiden album. Even though they have a lot of albums after this that are probably better and more important, like Number of the Beast, Peace of Mind, Power Slave. This one I probably listened to the most. I had my first real band in high school. We listened to this album a lot and played a lot of songs off of it, along with Kill 'Em All from Metallica, because those type of early metal was what the type of the songs we were writing, rather than their more complex music later on. It was probably between this one and Killers, the ones I've listened to the most. But I just had to go with this one because every song on here is a classic pretty much. And again, this was one I had on cassette early on in the 80s. Eventually got this deluxe CD. Next up, Dokken, Under Lock and Key. This one, pretty much every song on here could have been a single or a video. And I, listened to Tooth and Nail a lot. That was a big album for me. Back for the Attack was also a big album, but this one I listened to, again, I had this on cassette originally. I listened to this like for years on end. It was one of my favorite George Lynch era guitar albums. Next up, Queensryche, Operation Mindcrime. I was almost going to put Empire in here, but I had to figure that this one I probably listened to all the way through more, because it's obviously it's a rock opera. This was pretty mind-blowing when it came out, as far as the storyline and all the guitar interplay and guitar harmony. They were a pretty big band for a while. I sort of forgotten about how big they were at one point. But yeah, listened to this a lot during, whenever this came out, like 88, I believe, through the early 90s. So that's like a 5-year period. Next up, this might surprise some people, but the first Weezer album. And it's only because my friends and I, around the time that this was released, drove around every night. Probably this is the one of the albums that we agreed on listening to, because some of my friends were into, alternative or grunge or whatever. This is more like power pop, really not grunge, but it was during that era. But definitely an album that for years on end we were listening to almost every day. I like several of their albums. Probably the first 4 or 5 I like a lot. After that, really lost them. They sort of almost became too emo or too commercial. But this is a classic. Next up is the only compilation I put on here. Like I said, I didn't put any live albums, but this one is a compilation with some live tracks. And it's the first album I got by this band, The Kids Are All Right, from The Who. It's a soundtrack to the film, which was shown a lot on MTV Saturday nights instead of one of their concerts they used to show. This is the early 80s. And it's the first album I had from them. I dubbed a cassette copy of my cousin's copy and listened to this daily for years until I got more of their stuff. And the versions of the songs on here are the ones I sort of identify with as being the definitive versions. But it's just a mixture of singles, live tracks, alternate versions, but it's a great collection. And listen to this a lot. This next one, it's maybe not the album I listen to the most from them, and I'll explain why. But this is the first album I got that was new from them at the time. Master of Puppets, I remember that coming out, and a college radio station by me played it a lot, but for some reason I didn't pick it up right away. This one I definitely got within the first couple days it was released, and on cassette, and released it, listened to it constantly when it was first out. Then I got the CD in the 90s, listened to that, and eventually got a reissue of the vinyl. And the reason I say that it may not be the one I listened to the most is because when the Black Album was out, you just heard that album walking around the streets or the mall. It was just played constantly. And my brother, younger brother, had the Black Album and played it every day at like ear bleeding levels. So I heard it like sort of inadvertently constantly, even though I wasn't listening to it really. But this is the one I probably listened to the most times. And then finally, Van Halen. This was a tough one to pick between this one or 1984. It was probably this one though, because I got this originally on cassette. And then when I first got a CD player, I believe 86, this was one of the first CDs I got. I still have that CD. And eventually, several years ago, got a copy on vinyl, which sounds great as well. But definitely listened to this probably the most, more than 1984, because this was the newest Van Halen album I received. That was the newest album when I started playing guitar. So I listened to this album constantly, and also they put out a live home video at the time, Live Without a Net, and I watched that like every day as well. So this is probably the one I listened to the most over the years. You know, the first one I've heard probably just as many times, but me purposely listening to this, I would say this one. So there you have it. There's my top 10 most listened to albums of all time. Probably some of them are no surprise. If you know what the type of music I like, some of them might have been a surprise. But I plan also on doing a top 10 live album listened to the most, because, like I said earlier, I was buying live albums in the beginning by bands just to like learn their songs and all that. And like I said before, I would like to do a lot more collaborative videos with people, because I think those are more enjoyable than just going out there and talking about the latest reissue of whatever, you know. So if you're interested, you know, send me an email or make a comment. Again, if you like these videos, please hit the like and subscribe button, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks.